Welcome to UnstuckAF, a podcast here to help you do you better. There's a path that starts where you are, passes through who you are, and leads where you want to go. We're here to hear from people who've walked that path or who are walking it right now. This is Orlando Bishop, Coach Orlando, and I thank you for listening as we learn how to get unstuck, how to be unstuck, how to live unstuck. Unstuck as fuck. Welcome to UnstuckAF, and this week is going to be, or this episode, I should say, is going to be a little bit different. I'm very excited. As always, I get fired up, but this week we have two guests and not one. Erika Higgins Ross and I have been friends now for, I believe it's about 12 years, and we met out in LA. She's now on the East Coast, but she was in LA and was the person who introduced my family to the school that my kids went to through elementary and middle school. So that's how we came together. I mean, we'll stumble into a little bit more of that story as we go. And we've just shared a lot over the years in terms of our arts and writing and performing, but also in terms of some of our thoughts on the way relationships go. Also, our guest is CJ, Cornelius Harris, who I've called CJ his entire life. Not quite my entire life, because he's the younger good-looking one. But he's my cousin, and he's not on though today because he's my cousin, but he's on because he is also a marriage and family therapist, as is Erika. And so as we have this conversation together and talk a little bit about the work they're doing now with Align and that they were going to be offering to others, bringing them together as a team struck me as a good idea. And so far it's feeling like my instinct was just about right. So I'm going to give you each a chance to say hello. Erika, say hello to the folks.
Hello. Orlando gave me a good intro, and I'm a marriage and family therapist in Massachusetts at this point, and I'm also a writer. And I'm so excited to be working with Align and talking more about how to relationship well.
Yeah, love it. CJ.
My name is Cornelius, but everyone does refer to me as CJ. I am an associate, a marriage and family therapist associate at this point. I'm doing the things necessary to get my license. So I'm getting prepared for that as well as the test. Hopefully I should be licensed soon in the state of Connecticut. I am very, very excited to be here, and I'm super excited to begin this journey with WeAlign and just to explore how we can relationship better.
Excellent. So jumping in from there, CJ, you've listened to enough episodes to know the way we start out. And so I'm going to come to you first and ask, how and or when did you know that relationships, specifically for you, marriage, was going to be a big part of your life?
Very interesting question. And it took me some time to wrap my head around why relationships were important to me. And it took me even longer to figure out how to focus that into doing something about my passion around relationships. So relationships have always been huge for me. I have always tried to cultivate them and try to rescue them for other people when they're going through certain things. Mm-hmm. And no matter what else I was doing, that seemed to be the thing that I put the most effort into. And I was most passionate about. And it took me way too long to figure out that I could make a career out of this. So the thing that I do tell people when they ask me why I got into this field is it's because I want to be the person I needed when I was younger. When I was younger, I always had these thoughts that I was just weird and, outcast, and I was just different from everybody because of the thoughts I was having. And, once you're isolated in your, in your own head, it could become overwhelming sometimes. And I did feel like I didn't have any outlet. I didn't have anyone that was going to talk to me and make me feel quote unquote normal. And to be quite frank, back when I was younger, it was taboo to even think about seeking mental health and going to a professional and all that stuff. I mean, as a society, it's taboo, but it was even more taboo from the people that I looked like and the people I lived around and my environment and just my culture overall was a taboo thing. So it wasn't even a consideration. So part of the decision to get into this field also had to do with representation, because I wanted to be a person that looked at like those in my community, and just to make it a little bit more of an effort to make it okay to go out there and seek an outlet, an event, and to run things fast so you can unpack stuff and come up with a healthy pattern or a healthy way to navigate certain situations.
Excellent. A lot there. And generally, now I'm going to have to modify my interview style because there are about 3 or 4 things there, threads that I would naturally pull on. But before we start pulling on threads, Erika, I'm going to turn to you now and say, how and or when did you know that marriage and family therapy would be a big part of your life?
I didn't go back to school to be a therapist until I was in my mid to late 30s. So I think it was a culmination of so many different interests that I'd had. I definitely consider myself like through my 20s into my 30s, I was a bit of a career sampler. And I was a massage therapist. I was a teacher. I was a website editor. I mean, I just so many different jobs. I went to cooking school. I did all sorts of things. Yeah. I did a lot of things. And then when I met you, which was, I guess, around the same time that I was just finishing up school, I had sort of realized like, I need a real career. I have a kid now. My husband's a writer. I'm a writer. Somebody needs to carry the insurance. There was a lot of practical thinking. But for me, and I think similar to what CJ was saying, like relationships have always just been so primary to me. My friendships, relationships with, my kid, with my partner. And I've been in therapy quite a bit throughout my life, and I found it really helpful. So it felt like a pretty natural evolution. And then as soon as I started really studying marriage and family therapy and systemic therapy, which is what we both have studied and really, I think, look at more than just individual therapy, but really looking at how the system that you are in, whether it's big S system or family system or whatever system, is impacting who you are and how you are, like, just was fascinating to me. And I've loved being a family therapist in that there's lots of different things you can do with it too. I've worked in schools, I've worked in lots of different agencies, and now I have a private practice. So, and it's been something I can also do and continue to write and be a parent and have some flexibility. So it's been really wonderful as a career too.
Right. And so I'm going to ask about the systemic piece. Again, there were several threads there to pull, but I'm going to ask about the systemic piece for a moment, Erika. And what are some ways, and maybe, you could family and or, as you said, big S system. What are some ways in which you see those systems and the experiences folks have had with them impacting relationships? Like, being a marriage and family therapist, my sense is that by the time people come to you, they generally come to you because there's either a problem or a crisis. I'm guessing the vast majority aren't saying, we want to go from an A- to an A+. So what are some of the ways that you see that playing out, the systemic impacts and influences?
I think it's interesting because as you were talking, I was like, wow, there's so many ways systems impact, right, everything that we do. And how do I even answer that? But I think one thing that I love about systemic therapy or any kind of therapy with couples, with groups, is it's an opportunity to help people to get curious about how people see their own relationships and how they see their relationships to the system or who they see themselves as. So to me, the interesting part about therapy is to really help the client identify, or help whoever I'm working with identify what systems means to them. Something that we often do early on in a family therapy session is to basically make a genogram and start to have people draw out their relationships with all different people in their family, sort of what we would have called a family tree once upon a time, but and start to really look at the fact that within a system you have all these individual relationships going on at the same time. So like in a family, you might have 2 parents and whatever number of kids, and you have that system, but you also have individual relationships with each of the people within it. And then that plays. So to me, that's why it's so fascinating. It's sort of like unraveling all this stuff that we don't normally look at. We just go, oh yeah, this isn't working. It's like, yeah, but why? Like what's working, what's not? And also, and CJ and I have talked a lot about this, I think too, is we're both very strength-based in the work that we do. So an interesting part also becomes like, what is working? Who are your supports? What are the parts that we want to build and grow?
My sense, based on the conversations we've already had, is that this is going to evolve as we're even talking during this hour to where it's a little bit more of just us going back and forth. But I did want to ask CJ, going to the small less system of it. Erika spoke to the clients, how that plays in, looking at those pieces, so on. How would you say that's played out for you in terms of your choice to become a marriage and family therapist and or how you function in the role?
Like Erika, I'm fascinated by just how people they're just unaware of, the bigger picture sometimes. And it's no fault to anyone per se, but it is interesting to me to kind of look at systems the way Erika described them. And for me to be that person, professionally and in my personal life, to kind of cast a bigger net of what else could be influencing the quote unquote issue that's going on here. I have a great example of what Erika was saying. I did have a married couple, and there was a child that, was outside of the marriage that was older, and dad wasn't dad's biological kid. Dad was trying to relate. In the beginning, it was great when the kid was small, but teenage years are a little bit different, a little bit challenging. So
you don't say.
We're all like, really?
Yeah, I'm not playing it, guys. But that's to say the least, right? So dad found it a little harder to get this kid to cooperate and be a productive person in the house, and he was kind of stuck of like, that's not my biological kid. So slowly but surely it started pulling away the relationship, and eventually it became mom and dad kind of going at it on how to deal with this kid, and it turned into a them issue. When I had to kind of remind them, like, all right, so what are the goals, Dad, that you have for this kid? And he's like, I want him to be responsible. I want him to learn his actions have repercussions and consequences. And mom was like, I want the best for him too, but I just don't want him to, in her opinion, Dad was being too harsh. And in Dad's opinion, she was being too lenient. And when I boiled down their desires and expectations of the kid, they were super similar. They just had different ways of getting there. So I urged them, encouraged them to build on the things that they had in common, right? Strength building, because we both want the best for this kid. So let's start there. And instead of bickering with each other, how about we unite, come up with some common ground, and kind of attack it as a common front or a united front when addressing the kid. Because as long as you guys are divided, he's going to see that systemic stuff. He's going to see that he could get away with that, not necessarily do this, play to this side, blame that side for his behavior. But if you guys are united, that's a piece that he no longer has to play with. So just like I said, that was an example, but that's kind of an overview of how systems could be super impactful. And if you just take one piece, you might not be able to impact the whole system. But if we have a chance to look at the whole system, you have a greater chance to influence it in a positive way.
Now, I'm very aware that as the saying goes, I'll degender it and say to the person with the hammer, everything looks like a nail. But as you were speaking to getting clear on where they, what their goals were in terms of parenting, what they wanted for the child, I found myself thinking, that's it. That's the work, right? And that's the work that's missing so often as we make all these assumptions about what the goals are and or how is, the best ways to get there. If we even consider that, right? If you grow up in a certain system, you may just feel like, yeah, that's how life is. Everybody meets for dinner at 6:00. Right? And so I think there's a real value, and obviously we're going to swing into talking about aligned relationships, which I'm going to introduce in a second here. But I love the idea of consciously and proactively being able to say, we are entering into a relationship. And as we've all talked about, we're becoming more and more aware that relationships have all sorts of shapes and sizes and dynamics. But whatever that is, that we enter into it with an understanding and developing an understanding of where we want this thing to go. I mean, really all the stuff we say in the line, right? Who we are, where we are, where we want to go. I'm wondering where you have, either of you have seen in terms of when you have seen that kind of forethought. If, I'm sure at some point you have, but if ever, and when you have it, and sort of how that tends to impact what happens in those sessions and what kind of state relationships are in.
Well, one thing that I was thinking when CJ, you were giving that example, and then just Orlando, some of the stuff you're saying, one of the things that's been occurring to me is when we're talking about systems and we're talking about relationships, I sometimes like to say every relationship is an intercultural relationship. Like every relationship has two people from different cultures, right? And there are ones that we, as therapists, immediately would see like, oh, this is an interracial relationship. This is two different, religions. This is, a male and female, or this is, two women, but they're from different, but what I like to think about is like, kind of what you said, if someone came from a house where the expectation was you sat down to dinner every night, and someone else came from a house where they never sat down to dinner, that they ate in front of the TV, they made their own food, there was not a parent there cooking, whatever.
Right.
The assumptions that people come in with and that then lead to these interpretations like, wow, you really don't care about our family because you don't sit down at a dinner table, right? As opposed to, it didn't occur to you to sit down at a dinner table, right? That just wasn't even something you did. Or the other person in that relationship might feel like, God, you are trying to control me by always making me sit at this table. Like, and so it's kind of the way that we experience other people's, like our differences, that becomes a really interesting piece of this. And I think that is what couple therapy can do. But I also think relationship coaching and some of what we've been talking about is even more, would be even more attuned to this, which is before we're at a whatever level. We've talked a lot when the three of us have gotten together and talked, we keep using the word curiosity. So bringing curiosity into a relationship. So when, let's say CJ and I are just having a conversation and CJ says something and my immediate thought is like, wow, he said that, he must think this about me, or he pausing that and instead going, I'm curious about why you said that, right? Like I'm curious about what's happening for you right now, or like how you meant that. Because I think we jump right to our reactivity, and it's like, I make a lot of examples of my own marriage, and that there are certain things that my husband does that I'm like, what in the world? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. And I can either get really upset and make all these assumptions about he doesn't care, he isn't thinking about me, he's this, or I can be like, well, why'd you do that? Like really curious, right? Like really, like what's going on right now? And not, why are you doing that, right? Not going into that place, but more like, I'm truly curious about how your brain works. Because that's another thing. And we've talked some about this is neurodiversity. There are no two people in relationships whose brains are wired the same way, right? Whether you have a diagnosis or not, whether you're considered neuroatypical, atypical, our brains just all work differently.
I think that piece around our brains working differently also plays in with some of what you said around that meaning piece. And I like that you said it means that you don't care about our family. One of the things I've worked on my own, because, I know it looks like it from the outside, but I'm not perfect at relationship. But one of the things that I've worked on is making myself aware of what the actual fact is. And I can be aware of the story, and I may experience the story that goes along with it. But to use your example, to say, what is the actual fact? The actual fact is that the other person has not been sitting down to dinner, or doesn't seem interested in sitting down. That's the fact. And then we can, as you're saying, be curious and find out about what it actually means to them. That took a while. I mean, it just, there's some ways in which you are aware of it. And then I think there are just some things that we just assume, well, right, if you feel this way, you would do this. And if you loved me, you would, or, what have you. And so I'll go ahead and lay this out. We've been referring to it for the first part of the conversation here without really saying. So what we're moving toward, folks, is that we're going to have a suite of offerings, really, but we're going to definitely have an online course called AlignRelationships. And the idea is that we're going to apply all the strategy, development, and execution strategies and approach that folks have been using in any other number of ways, specifically for people in relationships. And we say relationships quite intentionally because we don't mean couples, and we certainly don't mean just heterosexual couples, and we certainly don't just mean marriages. We've had some conversation around the fact that relationships have taken and have always taken, but we're recognizing take all sorts of shapes and sizes and have all sorts of dynamics and rules and so on. And so we want to make room for all of that. But where our work comes in is we feel like we can help folks to organize this thinking, to get clear on the point for their relationship, going back to that parenting example, and really approach this in a methodical way that allows everybody to come up with the actual steps that are going to make it so that we don't get to some of these crisis points, because we've had the dialogues, we've made our decisions, and we're doing things consciously. And whether it's as an individual, whether I've been dealing with teams, whether I've been dealing with organizations, most of the times when things truly go off the rails, it has been because things are being done on autopilot, without much forethought or with assumptions being made, as opposed to there having been the conversation. So Erika and I started that conversation around the idea of aligned relationships. I don't know, that was about 10 years ago now.
Maybe. Decade ago, yeah.
Wow. And so that's sort of been there. And then this time came back around where everybody was on Zoom, and we went and sort of got hit with the idea that, like, well, hold on a minute, just because you're on one coast and I'm on the other. And as we brought CJ into that new conversation, this has all taken shape. So part of why we're doing this joint interview and having this joint conversation is to get folks to meet Erika and CJ and to think about aligned relationships and to think about this idea of not couples therapy, which tends to be a little bit more about correcting, fixing, mending, but around really having this look at relationship coaching that allows people to build in advance, get clear, set these parameters, and really move toward what we do want instead of remedying what we don't want or have gotten that we don't like. All that is built into why we're having this conversation. I wanted to ask, since I went there, just for either or both of you, what you find most exciting about the relationship coaching.
The most exciting part for me is that, yes, I do enjoy the work that I do with couples and even individuals, because even when you have somebody in an individual session, it doesn't mean that you're not working systemically. It's a little bit more difficult when you just have the one person, but you have to outline what's going on in their system and how they could impact it and stuff like that. But you got to recognize, sometimes when we have people come to us in those more formal therapeutic settings, they've already hit a crisis. They're already at, their boiling point and overwhelmed. But this is, I want to, forgive me for the sports analogy, but this is, in my mind, more so like, I'm pretty good at basketball. The coaches are looking at me. Colleges are sending me letters, but it's the summertime and I want to get better at what I'm doing. I'm already good, but I think it's some skills that I could hone. And there's some, I'm not that good with my non-dominant hand. I want to get in some practice with that, but I want to coach. That's going to give me some drills that I might not could think of my own, or give me the motivation to go ahead and do the thing that, I might have thought about doing, but I just didn't have the inner motivation to go ahead and do. Like, instead of doing 12 suicide runs, my coach wants me to do 25 of them. And it's like, I would have never did that on my own. So that's kind of where I put this kind of work, is like, relationships are good when they're good, but we could still make them better. I do get excited about that because we could dive right into the fun stuff with some of these more pressing cases and situations. Is like, you got to go through a lot of hurt and pain and trying to navigate those feelings and try to make it seem like you're not the only one going through this. This is totally normal. And then we could get into some skills, and then we could get into some, did you try this? Who's your support team? Maybe utilizing them a little bit more. We could get into that stuff a lot quicker than if they were already coming to us in crisis. So that's kind of what I'm excited about, is to get to the fun part a lot quicker.
Got it.
We meet and we talk a fair amount, the three of us at this point. And every time I hear something and I go like, oh yeah, and I learn things in these conversations, which is so great. And I just want to say, CJ, when you said, even when you're working with individuals, you have to think systemically. I was like, oh yeah, you hadn't really thought of it that way, that there's an internal system and there's all the systems that people are in. And so I got I'm always getting sparked by these conversations, which I think also leads to why I'm so excited to do this work too. It's like, I find it, really gets my brain going, and it gets me thinking about things from different places. We talked about curiosity. I'm so curious about people's lives and relationships and how they're doing things and how things are working, how things don't work. And so to me, it's a really exciting way to do that. And I think when CJ said that a lot of our clients, by the time we get them, have a lot of, they have a lot of things that feel broken. They have a lot of things inside, in the relationship that they feel have really hurt them. And so there is a lot of healing that has to happen. And I think conversely, what we start to notice, and I think we both noticed this in our work, we talked about it, is like a lot of the things that feel broken and that feel so painful could have been prevented, because so much of how they got to where they are were the assumptions, were the lack of clarity about guidelines and expectations, right? So I think I talked at some point about I work with some clients who consider themselves polyamorous. So they have more than one, relationship. And there's so many different ways that works. And I'm always curious and I'm always learning. But one of the things that I really admire about a lot of my poly clients is that they do that work up front. Is this our primary relationship? What are the rules? What are the expectations when we have other romantic relationships outside of the primary relationship? And what has occurred to me is that those of us who have predominantly chosen monogamous relationships, or those of us who are in more heteronormative relationships, like never did that work, and we should have, right? Because that's how you land 10, 15, 20 years in with these huge misunderstandings. And clients will say to me, like, can you believe he did that? And I'll say, well, was that the agreement or not the agreement? Right? And they have, they sort of don't even, what are you even talking about? Right. I'm like, yeah, if this is an affair, then yeah, you have a break here. But how much did you talk about at the beginning? What is in your relationship, your specific relationship? What kind of flirting is okay? What kind of flirting is uncomfortable? What are the parameters, let's say, just using that example? Or, was the agreement that you would do all the cooking? Well, we never talked about it. No. That probably should have been something you guys talked about. Right. Like, but we just don't. And then we get and then it's resentment, right? Then we end up in these like pools of resentment. So I think I also am really excited about helping people have the hard conversations about money, about sex, about, romance and expectation and parenting and all the stuff that a lot of people are going to do that are going to change over a lifetime too, right? Like if you expect your sex life in your 50s with your partner to look similar to what it looked like in your 20s, it's going to be rough.
You might have some work to do.
Right.
But if you can really talk about it, hey, what are the things we really want to hold on to? What are the things that might change? What are the things we might not be able to predict will change? I think that it could just shift the way people do relationships, I think.
The assumption part is huge. And you guys both kind of mentioned the assumptions. And I do think that as humans, we just have assumptions, right? We walk around just assuming that others think the way we think and come to some determinations that's similar to ours. And I've done a lot of work on privilege. And being a Black man in America, you don't consider yourself to be privileged. So it was a real shock to me when someone said, "Oh, well, you're a little privileged." I'm like, "Well, what do you?" I got a little offended. Right. But then it was a female I was speaking to, and she was like, "Well, do you have to worry about going to the gym like after work and going into an empty parking lot when it's dark? And do you have to consider, like, if you want to take a run early in the morning and the sun isn't up yet, that you got to go with mace and you have to go and protect yourself and go in well-lit areas where there's people. Like, you don't have to consider that stuff. And I think that, along with the assumptions is we don't really consider our privilege in heterosexual relationships, romantically. We don't have to do the work like Erika was describing with the poly, because it's like, they know that we can't take things for granted. They know that they foresee it being an issue if we do not have the conversation. So it's like, let's do the groundwork up front, where heterosexual relationships, we just kind of often these assumptions because everyone's seen Disney movies and Disney princesses and they get married and it's happily ever after. So what's the conversation about? So I think that, when we are faced with the other side of things, we don't even we take it so much for granted that we don't even think that that's the problem. Like, what do you mean we didn't have the conversation? How is that going to solve anything? This person's just insensitive. And it's like, whoa. I mean, if you had the conversation, you would see why they did what they did and where they were coming from. You guys could have came to some level playing field.
I've had this conversation with couples where sex, you get to a place where they're able and willing to talk about sex, or as a therapist, you nudge them and they go, I'm good. But I always love the example of, you say, all right, so I'm just going to ask you, partner number one, how often do you want to have sex? Perfect world. And partner number one might say, like, every day. All right. A healthy sex drive. Good on you. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with that. Good on you. Okay,
I don't
now,
see anything wrong with it.
partner number two. How about you? Well, I'm having some health problems and I got, fibroids, or I got whatever going on, whatever. Right now, really not at all. And what I'll say to that person is, nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong. There are some people who are asexual. There are people on every end of the spectrum. There are some people who want to have no sex. Right now, you're telling me you want to have no sex. That is not a shameful thing. You with the, hearty sex drive, that's not a shameful thing. Okay, but now we got to figure this out, right? And I think what happens in these marriages when you don't have someone having that conversation or helping them have that conversation, what ends up, and I'm sure you've seen this a lot too, CJ, people come in, this one wants to have sex all the time. Well, this one never wants to have sex. Like the other one is the problem, as opposed to like, neither one of you is wrong, right? But there's work we have to do. Yeah. And one of the possibilities, if you're really going to be outside the box, is like, is there a way that you can get your sexual needs met without this person having to participate? That's one option. Is there a kind of sexual participation that you could see enjoying that maybe is going to be more comfortable? Like, now we can have a conversation, but we can't have a conversation from a place of like, well, you don't ever want to have sex with me, so whatever, or all you want from me is sex, so whatever. That's where they come in. So I think like being able to talk to people early on, early relationship, and say, hey, what if this happened? What if your sex drive tanked? Or what if this happened? How would you guys work on that? What would you do? How would you have that conversation?
A lot of what you're describing too, the phrase that just came to mind is getting on the same side of the table, which is something that I've thought about in terms of negotiation all the time, and just conversations I've had in different organizations, and how often things, and it's a natural, I guess, response, things get to winning and losing.
Yeah.
And one of the things, and other people, I obviously always get this part right, but other people sometimes get wrapped up in the winning and losing. But really, one of the pieces of advice when I've had, folks who are getting married or, what have you, said to me, any words of wisdom, my main one is, and you wouldn't expect it from such a competitive person, is you can't win in a marriage. That's been you can win together. Y'all can win or y'all can lose, but one of y'all ain't gonna win. So if you just let go of the win-lose version of it, I think, and the sooner you do. So what I love about what you, in terms of sex drive, and again, to talk about a place where there are assumptions, plus there can be the difficulty of it's awkward, right? I feel vulnerable to be saying, I want sex, I'm not getting it. The other person feels vulnerable, like, oh, well, this person now thinks I'm frigid, broken, not good, so there's all that stuff going on. These are tough topics. And when the temperature's up, right, then it's even that much harder. So getting to them ahead of time, being on the same side of the table as a practice. I think beyond the specifics, I think you both mentioned skills, and I would have viewed that as a real help. I think when Daphne and I were preparing to get married, we did sort of like a cursory, the church where we were getting married required everybody to show up on a Saturday. And there was some value to that. But I think an even deeper dive that allows you to go through and develop skills around it, to think about, well, how are we going to talk about? How are we going to approach? What happens when I want to go north and you want to go south? And one example of that I'll put forward is that we were talking about, and it came out of that session, although the conversation went on, and Daphne and I were talking about corporal punishment. And my take was not something I plan to have happening all the time, and I remember making this joke because to me, everything's a joke, apparently. But I remember saying, beatings are like the nukes. Like, we're not really going to use them, but you want to keep them on the table, And she said, no, actually, no, they're not like the nukes. They're not like anything, and I don't want them to be brought, right? And I've said on multiple occasions, I'll say again now, that is the best argument I ever lost. Because it forced, by it being truly, truly off the table, I had to get creative. Right. There are times in the raising of the children that that wasn't just, bam, 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 you're going to do it the way I say, or this will happen again, wasn't on the table. And, not here for judgment or other people's choices, just like we talked about in all these other realms. And those can be a separate set of conversations. But I do think that level of clarity meant there wasn't going to be the day that Daphne came home and I said X, Y, and Z happened and I gave everybody spankings and she went, "Are you insane?" Right? Like we'd had this conversation. We made a team decision and I was, prepared to honor it. So anyway, I share that as sort of just a real life version of some of what you're each laying out.
Yeah. And we've talked a little bit about pastoral counseling, sort of being the only version that we know really of like there may be some other, but that idea of like, you have to go to driver's edge. You have to go to, you have to learn things before you take these big steps. And then we're just like, why would we think you could move into a relationship of this intimacy, whatever it looks like, whatever version of that is, without having these conversations, right? It's kind of crazy that we don't do it.
Absolutely.
It's also crazy besides the romantic stuff because Orlando, we have a family member that just recently went through some stuff at work where it's like they're entering into a new relationship. And one side had expectations, the other side had another set of expectations, and they clashed. But like we've been saying this whole time, the agenda is still aligned. They just had different paths to get there and different expectations of the other. So while we are mainly talking about romantic relationships, these other relationships could also benefit from initially having these conversations of expectations and why I feel this way and why I think that this is a priority and why I expect XYZ from you and this is what I could offer and all those other things that we've mentioned, I think is also going to be beneficial from friendships and working relationships and, maybe combining businesses together to, make a venture or whatever it is, because all these are relationships, right? Like even parents and children, especially teenagers. I think that should be its own segment because honestly, I could use some help. So,
we're all parents of teenagers. Yeah, we're with you.
Yeah.
Aligned parenting.
Yeah, seriously. One thing I toss into this mix, I'm curious for either of you. I guess when we were talking about systems, it plays into it, but also our histories and how those play in. And for me, I'll just share quickly that my parents divorced when I was like 5. It was definitely a violent situation that my mother decided to remove herself from. And I think I don't think I know. I've always been invested in figuring that piece out. Like I even remember I wrote a monologue that didn't take me long to decode when I was a kid. Of this little kid was a pyromaniac and we revealed through the monologue that his father had been killed in a fire. And I thought, replace fire with relationship, and here we are. And this idea of being able to be in control of it and handle it and do that. So for me, as we talk about aligned relationships, there's also beyond, and I tell people all the time, marriage is about who's going to wash the dishes. Like weddings are very flowery. I find marriage to be mundane in sometimes the best ways, but I am rooting for aligned relationships personally because I think that well-meaning people, depending on their histories, sometimes make choices they wouldn't make if they were making conscious choices. And I guess I would turn it back to either of you, and if there's nothing in this direction, fine. But I'm just curious, as you look at it from that personal level. Yes, you both do this professionally. Yes, you're totally skilled and know the skills that need to be taught and all of that. But just wondering if there's anything on that level that plays into what's exciting about aligned relationships right now for you, or what you would want to be able to share with those folks who come in to be a part of it.
I do find a little bit of, I don't want to label it as joy, but it's definitely satisfying when someone I've been working with has one of those moments where I might have figured it out 2 sessions ago, but that's not my job to just tell you. My job is to kind of travel along with you and ask the right questions, or just ask questions, remaining curious. Why do you think that? What brought that on? Where did that come from? And to watch them come to some realizations about their own lives and their own past experiences, and putting them together, putting those jagged edges together where they start to fit. There's something that happens to me personally to see that aha moment. And I take a lot of pride in that. Not to say that that's going to happen every time, and not to say that, I'm this unique person that's just you talk to me for a few sessions and you're gonna have an aha moment. No, but when it does happen, it's kind of magical to me. So am I excited about aligned relationship? Yes. Do I love what I do for a living? Yes. But more than that, I mean, you could just be having a regular conversation in my personal life, and if that happens, it still brings me joy. So I think that that's a staple of who I am, is I just love to be a part of a journey that, you come to some personal realization. And I mean, I love to see it on the other side, but when it happens to me, I'm like, oh, my mind's blown. And I'm just, I'm like that feeling of almost like a high of like, I just figured something out. I just realized something. So I love that feeling, and I love to see it with anybody else.
Yeah, I was talking, Orlando, that like, I've been in couples therapy with my husband, as well as being a couples therapist. And we are celebrating our 20th anniversary tomorrow, day after tomorrow. So we've made it through some tough stuff. Thank you. And I was thinking about when we were in couples therapy, and we of course got there. We'd separated and then got back together. And decided to try. So that was many years back. But I remember the therapist, who was very good, started asking my husband, because there was something going on where, like, well, he's, as you know, Orlando, he's a comic too. He's a stand-up comic, funny guy, comedy writer. So, that saves us a lot. The humor saves us a lot. Like, there are times where he can really get me laughing. But it also started to be a problem. You may relate to this, where, I felt like there were times I wanted to be validated and not hear a joke, or not, and I started to interpret some of his jokes as really thoughtless and careless. And, I was just kind of like, he's got to be able to read the room. Like, what is going on? Yeah. So this therapist started asking him a little bit about his sense of humor. And what ended up coming out during the session was he had a very scary father who was very loud and very intense and exploded all the time. And this was his survival. Right? His survival was, I'm the funny one. I make the jokes. I scoot out of the room. I get away from him, right? Whatever. And it became something he overdeveloped. He's really good at it. Became his career. And then it became his liability. Like most of us, right? We overdevelop our survival skills. And so it's both his greatest skill and his greatest, liability at times. But I remember when the therapist was asking him about this and really getting curious. And like I said, she was very good. And she was asking him. And I had been so sort of through it by that point that I felt myself being like, ugh, who cares? Oh, there's a story about his dad again. Oh my God, right? And it was great because I started to get kind of attitude-y. And the therapist was like, if you can't find a way to be interested in why he does the things he does, like you may be done. Like at a certain point, if you're not, you got to find your way back to that. Right. And I think it gets harder and harder the more damage gets done.
Yeah.
Which is another reason to do this stuff earlier. Yep. I think a huge part of the coaching will be a huge part of it will be us helping people listen to each other's stories with curiosity, with interest, with, empathy and compassion and like, oh, that's how you got like that. Right. Oh, okay. And then from there, you can start to say, and similarly, like I was raised by two parents who you actually know my parents, Orlando. And they're sweet old, very like waspy, sweet folks from Jersey. And they, but they, they're the thing that they most dislike is things to be unpleasant. We don't like unpleasantness. Nothing can be unpleasant, right? Which also means you have to be comfortable all the time. And you can't have conflict.
Right.
And you can't face what's really going on in the world, which is not very pleasant a lot of the time. So here's John like doing his survival. And here's me going like, pleasant,
Right.
So once we started to get curious about each other and even kind of like have humor about that, like, oh, you're doing that thing. That is such a weird thing you do, but like, I get why you do it.
Right. Right.
Sometimes I call it like the loving eye roll, where it's just like, oh, there's that thing the guy I love does, So anyway, so I think that's, I just think it's not like we're going to, solve all relationship problems by doing coaching. But I think in some ways we're just going to like shine these lights on like, these are the skills, these are the things you need to start to learn how to do to prevent all the, what you said, CJ, all the misinterpretations, the assumptions, the resentment.
What Erika kind of provoked in me just now was that thing about assumptions, right? Erika, you mentioned how at that point, and it's beautiful that you had the insight to know how you were feeling in that moment, right? To acknowledge it and label it and identify what was going on with you. But a lot of times when we assume for so long, an assumption is a story we tell ourselves. It might have some facts intertwined. It might just be purely, perception of this is what I see going on. But either way, an assumption is a story we tell ourselves. And if we tell ourselves that story for long enough, it becomes fact. And when somebody tries to offer, a different perspective or a different, spin on the events that led up to your assumption, sometimes it's really hard because now you're challenging what I assume to be a fact. So that's when you get the like, oh, here we go again. Like I already know what's truly happening. I already figured it out. And now here you go with your version that makes you look like the victim. That makes you look like you're Mr. Innocent when like I already know what this really is, right? So again, that assumption is a killer in relationships. It's a killer. And if you replace that with curiosity, a lot of times you save yourself a lot of headache because you're not trying to figure it out because we don't know what's going on in somebody else's brain. But when you're not trying to figure it out and you're allowing them to give some input into it. And Orlando, you know this, I say this all the time, like I might not know what's going on completely, but if I could have a better understanding, I might not agree. And that's okay. But if I could finally understand why something is happening, I walk away a little bit more content with the situation.
Right. I know we're getting close to the hour here, so I'm going to sort of wind us down. And the question I'd like to ask as we wrap up, visit us at WeAlign.alignp.com and join the community, and you'll see more announcements and information about Align Relationships as we're going to be bringing that to everyone over the next couple of months. But in the meantime, I'm curious as we talk about how do we relationship better for the person who maybe is going to listen to this podcast and then that's it. They're going to take whatever they've gotten from this and move on with their lives, and that's fine too. What is something you would each leave them with? What's one thing they can do as soon as this outro is done and the music fades out that they can be doing to relationship better?
So I guess this follows along with a lot of what we've been talking about, but I think the thing that was revolutionary for me when I started doing this work was this realization that when we think about improving relationships, we always talk about getting closer and being more together and more, enmeshed in a way. Mm-hmm. And I think really the work is to to really be two separate people who look at each other with interest, with curiosity, and really stand in your own, this is what I feel right now. This is what I need right now, right? Not get so caught up in but you said this, but you did this. The basic I statements, but more than the I statements, the I getting in touch with what do I want right now? Mm-hmm. That would be my one, starter pack.
I love that.
So for me, it's going back to the curiosity, because I really do think that the more curious we are in all relationships, the better off we would be, because we're allowing that person to give us permission to either move in a different direction or legitimately be upset about whatever is going on. So that and I love what Erika said about the I statements instead of the you statements, because just that little bit of tweak in our language could really change that assumption to an explanation, right? So it's not like this is what I'm assuming, this is what I'm accusing you of doing or feeling, and changing if you change it to an I statement, it's like, this is how I feel, this is what's going on with me, this is how this sets me up to feel, and that might not be your fault, that might not be your intention, but this is what's going on with me, right? So it's being curious and taking ownership of what you are kind of getting from the situation.
Interesting. I'll toss this in, and I probably, if I had it to do over, I might have gone before the experts, but I will do this anyhow. but off of what you both just said, there was an incident recently in my marriage that I think speaks to what I would share, which is that I forget what it was, but at any rate, I had the thing. Daphne had handed it to me. She clearly handed it to me. I didn't know where it was. It was fully lost. Okay. ADHD, object permanence, whatever you want to call it, I lost it. And so it just turns out for Daphne, having something not be lost is infuriating. That just, right. And for me, it's anxiety provoking to have lost it in the first place. And it's also anxiety provoking to feel that somebody that I'm close to or care about is angry with me. I'm in the room trying to look for it, but I can't even really think because I'm just like a ball of anxiety. And the longer we don't find it, the angrier she. And unlike what I think might have happened 10 years ago in our marriage, or 15 years ago in our marriage, where I then would get annoyed and be like, why are you, essentially, why are you making me feel this way, but expressing it however I did. And then she just responded, but you're the one who lost it. I said, I'm going to go look in this other room because I'm just getting totally anxious now and I'm not doing us any good in this room. And then that gave her room to say, yeah, I get really mad when I can't find things, that, but I'm not mad at you. I just want to find it. And suddenly we were back on the same side of the table. And I think there's something around developing that ability and risking the vulnerability. Because for me, looking back, a lot of times when I didn't do that and instead chose a more combative approach, it was protecting and trusting enough to be able to say, my anxiety is on 11 and I have got to go look in the kitchen. Just having that room. So I would say as much as you can, making room for the other person to do that. And I think when we take the first step and do it, we model it and we automatically are saying this is a way that I'd like for our communication to be. So that would be what I'd toss in. Yeah.
And I think what I thought about when you were saying that too is something I sometimes have kind of I feed to some of my clients as something to practice saying is, I think we're doing that thing we do. Right? Because what you just described was, it sounds like it's the thing you do, right?
Pattern,
You get anxious.
pattern,
She
yeah.
gets irritated. You get, defensive. She gets, And so if you could just step up and go, are we doing that thing? I think we're doing that thing.
That's great.
Right?
I love that. I love that. Well, I want to say, first of all, thank you to both of you for being guests on UnstuckAF. But more than that, I'm so excited and grateful that you've both been open to this idea of us creating this whole piece of Align that wouldn't exist otherwise. And the conversations that we've had just make me go, oh my God, the value here to folks is going to be, off the charts. And I think we're going to have a good time doing it. So Erika, I'll say first to you, thanks for all the conversations we've had about this. And thanks for just that creative energy that you bring to it, where it's sort of like, hey, anything's possible. Let's talk about it. Let's figure out. And we don't know what this might look like. I truly, truly appreciate that. And sorry, guys, yeah.
Just thank you. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's been so fun.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. And CJ, obviously we go back to your literal birthday, and it's been amazing to watch you make this choice to go down this road. The minute you told me you were going to become a therapist, my reaction was, well, yeah, that makes all the sense in the entire world. And so to now move beyond sort of just rooting from afar to where we're going to have this opportunity to develop this together, to work together, for me to watch you work what you know and be who you are, maybe as importantly in this specific way, is really exciting to me. So I'm glad you said yes to joining the team, cuz.
I love this. And thank you for helping me achieve an unrealized dream. This is something that didn't know I wanted. And it's also something that I absolutely need. So thank you for inviting me on board for this.
All right. Well, we'll be doing plenty more talking, y'all. Appreciate you. And take care.
Great. Thank you.
Break.
Bye.
All right, y'all. It's time to walk the line. When it comes to UnstuckAF, fam, we don't talk about it. We be about it. So here's your walk the line for episode 2 of season 2. Get to the point. Now, some of y'all might argue, bro, you need to take your own advice. To which I say, that's a little harsh. But anyway, here we go. Choose a relationship. It could be a relationship with a romantic partner or partners. But for this exercise, it could be a relationship with your child or parent or sibling or that coworker who got one more time to ask me for information I put in the damn email. Choose a relationship and get to the point. In Align terms, that means articulating what you want, how you want to communicate, what outcomes you want to generate, processes, practices, paint a picture, and then articulate why you want it. Imagine the communication, the work, the outcomes are as you've described. How do you feel? I'll go first, and I'll use our relationship, listeners, a relationship I cherish. I'd like to show up consistently with conversations that engage and inspire. When we get to the point, we'll be having robust conversations of our own, and WeAlign, our online community, around the issues raised in each episode. And why do I want it? Connection is my number one fuel. So I'd like to feel a sense of connection, of contribution, of camaraderie. Now, once we articulate the point, we go about defining the line to get there, but that is a different conversation for a different day. For today, ask yourself, what's the point? Then jump in the comment section, share your thoughts, and check out everyone else's. I know we can relationship better, and I believe with all my heart that we'll be glad we did. Until next time, you can join the conversation in WeAlign at wealign.alignp.com. Visit the Align Performance Facebook page and or follow us on Twitter, IG, TikTok. Check on Sunday, we might be in the church bulletin. What's that? Apparently we will not be in the church bulletin. But the rest of that shit was right. And if you like what you just heard, be sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. And we gon' get unstuck. We gon' be unstuck. We gon' live unstuck. Unstuck as fuck. Now, let's walk the line.